On the night of February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, California, disappeared under circumstances that have remained unsolved for more than 4 decades. Their names were Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, William Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. Together, they became known as the Yuba County Five. The men were close friends who shared a routine built around family life, part-time jobs, and a basketball team called the Gateway Gators. Each of them either lived with parents or relied on family support due to mild intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions. Despite these challenges, they were described by relatives as responsible and dependable in daily activities. On that February evening, the group drove to California State University, Chico, to attend a basketball game. Witnesses later confirmed they were in good spirits, enjoying the event, and showed no signs of distress. After the game ended around 10:00 p.m., they left together in Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego, planning to return home the same night. They never arrived. When families awoke the next morning and discovered the men had not come back, they immediately reported them missing. The search that followed uncovered one of the strangest cold cases in California history. Months later, after snow melted in the nearby mountains, investigators found evidence that 4 of the men had died under unexplained conditions. One, Gary Mathias, has never been located. The puzzling details: an abandoned car, a stocked trailer that went unused, and unexplained travel deep into the wilderness, have led investigators and the public to compare the mystery to the Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia. This case remains unsolved, and official files still classify the events of that night as an unexplained disappearance and death investigation. Background on the Yuba County Five. The 5 men at the center of this case were all from the Yuba City area of California. Though in their 20s and early 30s, they lived at home with their parents and were described as inseparable friends. Their families often called them the boys because of their strong attachment to routines and shared interests. The men: Theodore Ted Wire, 32. Ted was known as friendly and gentle. He worked small jobs through a vocational program and relied on his parents for support. Ted also struggled with a learning disability and had limited ability to care for himself in unfamiliar situations. Jack Madruga, 30. Jack was an Army veteran and had previously worked at a job driving trucks. He did not drink or smoke, and family described him as quiet but dependable. Jack owned the group's car, a 1969 Mercury Montego, which would later become a central part of the case. William Bill Sterling, 29. Bill had a strong religious background and often spent time visiting patients at local hospitals to talk about faith. He was deeply close with the group, and his routines were structured around both family and friends. Jack Hewitt, 24. Jack was the youngest of the group. He was cheerful and loved jokes, though his family said he had the mental development of a younger teenager. He was deeply attached to Ted, often looking to him for guidance. Gary Mathias, 25. Gary's case differed slightly. He had served in the Army, but was discharged due to a psychiatric condition, later diagnosed as schizophrenia. Despite this, he was stabilized with medication and had been living at home, holding down odd jobs and spending most of his free time with the group. His stepfather described his relationship with the other 4 as positive, saying they helped him stay grounded. Shared interests. All 5 were active members of the Gateway Projects, a vocational rehabilitation center. It was here that they joined a basketball team called the Gateway Gators, a program for athletes with developmental disabilities. Basketball became the central bond of their friendship. The group's families noted that the men lived sheltered lives, rarely traveling far without each other. Their parents described them as dependable, the type who would not miss meals at home, would not leave without telling someone, and always made plans around each other. At the time of their disappearance, the group was especially excited about an upcoming Special Olympics basketball tournament. Their team was scheduled to play the very next day, and each man had carefully laid out his uniform the night before. Winning that game would have earned them a free trip to Los Angeles. This background is important because it highlights why their disappearance was so unusual. These were not men likely to take risks, leave suddenly, or travel without a purpose. Their families' insistence that something was wrong proved accurate when events unfolded in the mountains of Northern California. The day before, February 24th, 1978. On Friday, February 24th, 1978, the five men followed their normal routines. Each of them spent the early part of the day at home or around their neighborhood. Their focus was on a basketball game scheduled for that evening. The group's plan was to drive about 50 miles north from Yuba City to attend a college basketball game at California State University, Chico. The match was between Chico State and UC Davis. This outing was not unusual. They often went to watch basketball games together, and it was one of their favorite shared activities. That morning, each man had prepared for a bigger event planned the following day. On Saturday, February 25th, the Gateway Gators, their own team, were scheduled to play in a tournament sponsored by the Special Olympics. This was something they had anticipated for weeks. The winner of the regional competition would be awarded a trip to Los Angeles, and the men were eager to compete. Each of them had laid out their basketball uniforms and equipment in advance. Their families later used this as evidence that none of them had plans to leave or disappear. They were looking forward to playing. That evening, the five men got into Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego and made the trip north. Witnesses confirmed their presence at the game in Chico. People who saw them recalled that they were enjoying themselves, laughing, and fully engaged in the event. Nothing appeared unusual. When the game ended around 10 p.m., the group left the university together. They stopped afterward at a nearby convenience store to buy snacks and drinks for the ride home. A clerk later remembered their visit, noting that the men were in good spirits. From that point on, the group's movements became uncertain. Instead of heading directly south toward Yuba City, their car somehow ended up many miles east, on remote mountain roads leading into Plumas National Forest. This marked the last confirmed time anyone saw all five men together alive. The decision to drive toward the mountains remains unexplained, and it set in motion the events that would become one of California's strangest missing persons cases. The disappearance. When the men failed to return home on the night of February 24th, 1978, their families noticed immediately. Each of them had routines and responsibilities that made an unexplained absence unusual. Parents expected them home after the Chico game, and when they did not arrive, concern grew quickly. By the following morning, February 25th, it was clear something was wrong. Family members began calling friends and local authorities, reporting all five men missing. Their parents stressed that this behavior was entirely out of character. Not only were the men dependable in their habits, but they also had the Gateway Gators basketball tournament scheduled that day. Missing it without notice was described as unthinkable. Local law enforcement opened a missing persons investigation. The group's backgrounds and vulnerabilities heightened concern. Ted Wire and Jack Hewitt had intellectual disabilities, which limited their decision-making in stressful situations. Bill Sterling was deeply routine-oriented, and his family said he was unlikely to go anywhere unfamiliar on his own. Jack Madruga, the car owner, was known as careful and rarely left the Yuba City area. Gary Mathias managed schizophrenia with medication, but being without it for long periods could put him at risk. Together, these factors suggested the men were unlikely to simply take a trip without warning. Initial searches focused on highways between Chico and Yuba City. Investigators assumed the Mercury Montego must have broken down, or the group had suffered some kind of roadside accident. Flyers went out, local news reported the disappearance, and volunteers joined law enforcement in the early efforts. Days passed without progress. No sign of the car, no evidence of an accident, and no witness reports gave a clear direction. For weeks, the case remained at a standstill. The lack of leads was distressing for the families, who pressed authorities for more intensive searches. In the absence of clues, speculation began to spread in the community. Some believed the group might have been victims of foul play. Others thought they could have become lost in the rural areas between Chico and Yuba City. Everything changed when, several days later, the group's car was located, not on a highway or near their homes, but far into the mountains, in a place that raised even more questions than answers. The car discovery. On February 28, 1978, 4 days after the men were last seen, authorities located Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego. The discovery deepened the mystery. The car was found on a deserted, snow-covered mountain road in the Plumas National Forest, about 70 miles from Chico and well east of their intended route home. The location puzzled investigators immediately. The road where the car was abandoned led toward a campground near Oroville, but was remote, winding, and unfamiliar to the group. None of the men had any known reason to be in that area. Their families stressed that they avoided places far outside their daily routines, especially isolated mountain roads in winter. The condition of the Mercury added to the confusion. The car was not stuck in snow, though there was some snowpack around it. Investigators noted that 5 men could have easily pushed it free if needed. The vehicle had a quarter tank of gas left, and the battery was functional. No mechanical problems were found. The keys were missing, but the doors were unlocked. There was no sign of foul play, no broken glass, no forced entry, and no visible struggle. Inside the car, police found snack wrappers, empty cartons, and program guides from the Chico basketball game. This confirmed the men had left the game and traveled together in the Mercury. However, no maps or directions were present, and there was no indication of why they had chosen this route into the mountains. One detail stood out. The car was in good condition, suggesting that Madruga had not driven recklessly. Jack was known to be careful with his car, and investigators observed no dents, scratches, or signs of an accident. Yet the vehicle had been driven almost 70 miles out of the way, into terrain the group was not familiar with. The discovery left law enforcement with more questions than answers. Why would the men abandon a working car? Why head into the mountains instead of returning home? With snow continuing to fall and freezing temperatures setting in at night, their survival without shelter or supplies was unlikely. Search teams began combing the surrounding area on foot, by snowmobile, and from the air. For weeks, they scoured the forest roads and trails, but found no trace of the 5 men. Each search ended in frustration, with only the abandoned Mercury Montego serving as the last known piece of evidence of their movements. This stalled the investigation for months. The harsh winter conditions and heavy snow buried any possible tracks or clues. It was not until the snow melted in spring that the mystery of the Yuba County Five took an even darker and more unsettling turn. The long winter search. After the discovery of the Mercury Montego in late February 1978, search efforts expanded into the Plumas National Forest. Authorities were determined to find the 5 men, but the environment worked against them. The area was buried in deep snow, with drifts measuring up to 6 feet in some places. Nighttime temperatures regularly dropped below freezing, creating dangerous conditions for anyone stranded without shelter. Search crews on foot, snowmobiles, and even helicopters faced constant setbacks. Despite thorough sweeps, no footprints, clothing, or personal items linked to the missing men were located. Volunteers, law enforcement officers, and family members joined forces during this period, often scouring the area daily. The families remained convinced that something was seriously wrong, since all 5 men were unaccustomed to wilderness conditions. They were not outdoorsmen, and none had experienced camping, hiking, or navigating mountain terrain in winter. The only firm evidence investigators had was the abandoned car. Because it showed no sign of mechanical failure, theories emerged that the men had either intentionally left it behind or been forced to, but no followable trail led away from the site. Heavy snowfall quickly erased any physical signs that could have explained their movements. As weeks turned into months, the search grew more desperate. Without fresh leads, resources became harder to allocate. The official investigation noted the severe difficulty of finding 5 people in such harsh terrain, especially given how quickly weather could bury evidence. By March, search operations slowed. The car remained under periodic observation, but the mountain was too vast and conditions too poor for daily ground efforts. Families waited for news, but received none. The investigation entered a standstill through the remainder of winter. Law enforcement acknowledged that no progress would likely be made until the snow thawed. For the time being, the 5 men were considered missing without trace. It was not until June 1978, when the snow melted, that new discoveries were made. What emerged provided answers to some questions, but also revealed disturbing new mysteries about the fate of the Yuba County Five. The snowmelt discovery. In June 1978, as the heavy winter snow in the Plumas National Forest began to thaw, the fate of most of the Yuba County Five finally came to light. What search teams found, however, only deepened the mystery. On June 4, 1978, a group of motorcyclists exploring the area discovered an abandoned U.S. Forest Service trailer near a campsite roughly 20 miles from where the Mercury Montego had been found. Upon investigating, they came across a strong odor and signs of human remains. They quickly notified authorities. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered the body of Theodore Ted Wire inside the trailer. His remains were stretched out on a bed, wrapped in several sheets, as though someone had attempted to provide care or warmth. Wire-ES beard growth suggested he had survived for as long as 13 weeks after the initial disappearance. He had lost significant weight, and medical reports concluded that he died from starvation and exposure, despite being in a shelter with available food. The condition of the trailer raised disturbing questions. It was stocked with canned food, dehydrated meals, and heating materials, but most of it had gone untouched. Authorities later confirmed that there were matches and propane supplies available that could have kept the men warm and fed. None of it had been used. In the days following the discovery of the trailer, additional searches in the surrounding area uncovered more grim findings. About 11 miles from the Mercury Montego, searchers found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Their bodies were located close together, partially consumed by animals and lying in the forest near a road. Investigators concluded they had likely succumbed to exposure while trying to make their way toward help. 2 days later, search dogs led police to the remains of Jack Hewitt, located about 2 miles from the trailer. His body was scattered, likely due to wildlife activity, but his identification was confirmed through dental records. The discovery of 4 of the men painted a partial picture of what had happened. The group had left their car and traveled on foot into the mountains, eventually splitting up. Some made it to the trailer but failed to use its supplies effectively, while others died along the way. But the story was still incomplete. One of the 5, Gary Mathias, was not among the remains. Despite extensive searches around the trailer and the surrounding wilderness, no trace of him was ever found. His tennis shoes were discovered inside the trailer, suggesting he may have left barefoot or exchanged shoes with Wire, but his body has never been recovered. The discoveries in June provided heartbreaking closure for 4 families, but left investigators with more questions than answers. The men had walked deep into the mountains under harsh winter conditions, abandoned resources that could have kept them alive, and ultimately perished in a way that defied easy explanation. The mystery of the Forest Service trailer. The discovery of the Forest Service trailer raised some of the most perplexing questions in the Yuba County Five case. The trailer sat in a remote area of the Plumas National Forest, about 19.4 miles from where the Mercury Montego had been abandoned. It was typically used as a shelter for forest workers and was equipped with basic supplies that could sustain people during emergencies. Inside, authorities found the body of Theodore "Ted" Wire. He was lying on a bed, wrapped in multiple sheets, and appeared to have been cared for to some degree. His beard growth suggested he had survived as long as 13 weeks after the night of the disappearance. Wire weighed less than 100 pounds at the time of his death, and autopsy results concluded that he died from starvation and exposure. The trailer itself had enough resources to prevent that outcome. Investigators documented an ample stock of canned food, freeze-dried meals, and heating materials, including matches, paper, and propane tanks. Yet almost none of these supplies had been used. One large storage locker containing dehydrated meals was partially opened, and a few cans of food had been consumed, but the vast majority remained untouched. Authorities noted that Wire could not have carried the supplies alone, raising the possibility that others had been with him earlier. Even more puzzling was the failure to use the propane heating system. The trailer had a propane tank outside, which could have provided consistent heat, but it was never activated. Investigators confirmed that the equipment was in working condition. Why the men did not use it remains unexplained. Personal belongings inside the trailer provided further clues. A pair of shoes belonging to Gary Mathias was found, suggesting he had been present in the trailer at some point. Wire's feet were wrapped in several layers of material, which led some investigators to believe that Mathias may have exchanged shoes with him. However, without Mathias's body, this could not be confirmed. The sheets wrapped around Wire indicated that someone else might have been alive in the trailer for some time, tending to him before leaving or perishing elsewhere. Given Wire's limited ability to care for himself, it was unlikely he had managed to arrange the bedding on his own. The existence of food, heat, and shelter left authorities with an unresolved contradiction. 4 of the men died of starvation and exposure within reach of resources that could have saved them. The trailer evidence suggested confusion, lack of knowledge, or impaired decision-making, but no definitive explanation was ever established. The Forest Service trailer remains central to the enduring mystery of the Yuba County Five. It was the place where one man clung to life for weeks, surrounded by unused supplies, while the fate of the others played out in the frozen wilderness around him. Gary Mathias, the missing man. Of the 5 men who vanished in February 1978, Gary Mathias remains the only one never found. His absence continues to be one of the most debated aspects of the case. Mathias was 25 years old at the time of the disappearance. He had served in the U.S. Army, but was discharged after developing schizophrenia. Following treatment, he returned to live with his parents in Yuba City. His condition was stabilized with prescribed medication, and by 1978, he was described as doing well. He was close to the other 4 men and spent much of his free time with them. His stepfather later emphasized that Gary relied on his friends as a source of support and stability. When the group's car was found in the Plumas National Forest, none of the men were nearby. Months later, when the trailer and the remains of 4 of the men were discovered, investigators found several of Mathias's personal belongings inside. His tennis shoes were in the trailer, while a pair of leather shoes, believed to be Wire's, were missing. This suggested the 2 may have exchanged footwear at some point. Despite intensive searches of the area around the trailer and the surrounding forest, no trace of Mathias's body was located. Cadaver dogs, ground teams, and aerial sweeps were deployed, but nothing definitive was uncovered. His disappearance left open the possibility that he traveled farther away from the trailer than the others, though no evidence has confirmed this. Mathias's family held on to hope longer than the other families, since there was no proof of his death. Law enforcement, however, has officially classified him as missing and presumed dead due to the conditions and time that has passed. The absence of Mathias added another layer of uncertainty to the case. If he survived longer than the others, why did he not seek help? If he left the trailer, where did he go? His missing remains left many unanswered questions and remain one of the primary reasons the Yuba County Five case is still considered unsolved today. Section 10. Theories and speculation. The discovery of the Yuba County Five in such unusual circumstances led investigators, journalists, and families to consider a number of possible explanations. While no theory fully resolves the mystery, several have remained central to discussions of the case. 1. Wrong turn and disorientation. One of the earliest explanations suggested that Jack Madruga, who was driving, may have accidentally taken a wrong turn after leaving Chico. Supporters of this theory point to the fact that Madruga was unfamiliar with mountain roads and may have been confused in the dark. The men could have continued driving until snow made the road impassable, leaving them no choice but to stop the car. However, this theory has weaknesses. Madruga's family stressed that he was careful with his car and would not have willingly driven it onto dangerous or unknown roads. Additionally, the car was found in good condition, not stuck or damaged, making it unclear why the men would abandon it in the first place. 2. Panic or mental health crisis. Some investigators considered whether Gary Mathias's schizophrenia may have played a role. Without his medication, he could have experienced confusion or paranoia, possibly influencing the group's decisions. His missing body added to speculation that he might have wandered away from the others or acted unpredictably. Yet, family members and clinicians pointed out that Mathias had been stable for over 2 years and was successfully managing his condition. Friends said he was functioning well at the time and relied heavily on the group, making it less likely that he would cause deliberate harm or panic. 3. Seeking help or shelter. The fact that the men traveled about 20 miles from the car to the Forest Service trailer led to the theory that they were trying to find shelter. Once inside, at least some of them survived for weeks, suggesting a strong effort to stay alive. The problem lies in why they did not use the food, matches, and propane available in the trailer. Investigators noted that the men may not have known how to operate the equipment or feared damaging government property. Still, this explanation cannot account for why Wire was left to starve while surrounded by food. It also does not explain why Mathias disappeared entirely. 4. Foul play. The men's families long believed that foul play may have been involved. The group was not known to venture into the mountains, especially in winter. Relatives argued that someone must have lured or forced them onto that road. Over the years, tips occasionally surfaced about hostile encounters in the area, but no evidence confirmed an attack. The car's condition complicated this theory. If foul play were involved, it was unclear why there were no signs of struggle, damage, or forced entry. The men's personal items were not stolen, and nothing at the scene suggested a confrontation. 5. The boogeyman theory of local danger. Because the case occurred in a remote forest area, speculation grew that the men encountered a threat specific to the mountains, possibly a local individual known to authorities or a situation that scared them into fleeing the car. This line of thinking paralleled the Dyatlov Pass comparisons, in which hikers fled their tent without clear reason. No suspect fitting such a profile was ever identified, and no physical evidence supported the idea. Nonetheless, this possibility remained in circulation because of the lack of logical explanations for the group's movements. 6. Accidental hypothermia and paradoxical decisions. Some researchers believe the men may have been experiencing the effects of hypothermia, which can cause disorientation and poor judgment. This could explain why they ignored the food and heat sources in the trailer. Cases of paradoxical undressing and confusion under extreme cold are well documented. However, Vire survived for weeks inside the trailer, which suggests that hypothermia was not the only factor. The length of his survival contradicted the idea of sudden collapse due to cold. Why the case remains unresolved. Each theory explains certain aspects but leaves major questions unanswered. Why travel so far into the mountains? Why abandon a functional car? Why leave a stock trailer unused? Why was Matthias never found? The official investigation has never determined a single cause. The Yuba County Sheriff's Department classified the deaths as a mysterious disappearance, followed by death from exposure. To this day, no further evidence has been uncovered that clarifies what happened after the group left Chico on the night of February 24, 1978. Theories continue to circulate in documentaries, podcasts, and articles, reflecting the deep frustration of both investigators and families. The Yuba County Five remain one of California's most perplexing cold cases, a story with evidence but no definitive explanation. Comparison to Dyatlov Pass. The Yuba County Five case is often compared to the Dyatlov Pass incident in the Soviet Union, which occurred in 1959. While the two events happened decades and continents apart, similarities in their unexplained nature led journalists and researchers to draw parallels. In the Dyatlov Pass case, 9 experienced hikers disappeared in the Ural Mountains. Their tent was found cut open from the inside, and their bodies were discovered scattered across the snow. Some were missing clothing, others showed injuries inconsistent with simple accidents, and no single explanation has ever been confirmed. The Yuba County Five shared several features with that mystery. Both involved groups of people who set out on what should have been a straightforward journey, but ended up in remote, hostile environments. In both cases, decisions appeared irrational to outside observers. The Soviet hikers left their tent in extreme cold, while the Yuba group abandoned a working car and failed to use supplies in a stocked trailer. Another similarity was the lasting lack of resolution. For Dyatlov Pass, theories ranged from avalanches to military testing. For Yuba County, speculation included foul play, mental health crises, and disorientation. In both, the absence of definitive answers allowed speculation to continue for decades. Despite these comparisons, there are important differences. The Dyatlov group were skilled hikers with survival knowledge, while the Yuba County Five were inexperienced in wilderness travel. The Dyatlov victims showed severe injuries, while the Yuba victims died primarily from exposure and starvation. Additionally, Dyatlov occurred in an isolated foreign environment during the Cold War, while the Yuba case happened close to home in California, within reach of civilization and resources. The comparison is less about identical circumstances and more about how both cases remain unresolved mysteries. Each highlights the limits of investigation when evidence is incomplete and survival choices defy outside logic. Both have captured public imagination because they illustrate how quickly routine outings can turn into tragedies that leave families, investigators, and the public searching for answers that never fully arrive. Legacy and unanswered questions. The case of the Yuba County Five remains one of the most enduring mysteries in California's history. More than 4 decades later, investigators, families, and researchers still cannot explain why 5 men left a basketball game in Chico and ended up deep in the Plumas National Forest. For the families, the loss was especially painful. Each of the men lived sheltered lives under the watchful care of their parents, who emphasized that their children were dependable, loving, and rooted in routine. Their sudden disappearance shattered that sense of security. The families of Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jack Hewitt eventually received confirmation of their deaths. But under circumstances that made little sense. For Gary Matthias's family, the absence of his body left them with unanswered questions that persist to this day. The case also left investigators with a record that pointed in many directions, but provided no single conclusion. The working car, the long walk through snow into the wilderness, the unused trailer supplies, and the missing man created a sequence of facts that resisted a coherent explanation. Officially, the deaths were attributed to exposure and misadventure. but the reasoning behind the men's movements remains unknown. Over the years, the case has been revisited in documentaries, podcasts, and articles, often referred to as America's Dyatlov Pass. The nickname reflects both the confusion surrounding the events and the fascination they continue to generate. Each time the story resurfaces, new audiences are struck by the same central puzzle. Why would 5 men with little survival knowledge take such a path? And why did they fail to use resources that could have saved them? The unanswered elements ensure that the case remains active in public discussion. Without Gary Mathias's remains, there will likely never be full closure. His absence leaves open possibilities that range from his death somewhere still undiscovered to less likely scenarios of survival. The legacy of the Yuba County Five is one of sorrow, confusion, and ongoing speculation. It illustrates how even in modern times, with investigators and technology, some mysteries remain unsolved. The men left behind evidence, but not explanations, ensuring that their story continues to stand as one of the most haunting cold cases in American history.